Perfect. All right. Thanks everybody for coming out to the 12 o'clock session with Coach Jones at Drury University. Um, and he's going to be presenting League of Legends, coaching League of Legends today. So yeah, thank you again. Enjoy, and if you have any questions, use the League of Legends chat in order to get those answered. Thank you, Coach Jones. It's all yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nate. I really appreciate it. As Nate said, my name is Michael Jones. I'm the head coach of the varsity esports program here at Drury University in Springfield, Missouri. Up front, I just wanted to personally thank each of you for setting aside some time on your Saturday here, right as the semester is getting started and things are getting back into swing and getting busy, to devote some time here to professional development for yourselves for the benefit of your students. It's always amazing to see the level of grassroots support from teachers across the state and in their communities that are making all of this possible, creating these amazing opportunities for their students. So, just a quick pat on the back for everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Go ahead and jump right in. If everyone looks just 3 posts up to in this LOL chat channel that we're in, to what Amy posted on the literally a year ago today. There are 3 links to the VODs of my session from this last year. We did sort of 3-hour blocks, beginner, intermediate, advanced, as you can see. I covered a lot of concepts, and if you're not able to be here today and you're watching this now as a VOD, that might be a good place to start over there in the MOSEF conference server. The link of which to join is in the main MOSEF server if you're seeing this in sort of YouTube form or something. That's a great place to start. I go through everything in a much more organized way. Not to say that I'm not going to do that today, but we have a bit of a smaller group, many of which I think were either there last year or I've spoken with and worked with in the past, and I know that are a little more experienced. So I want to spend most of the session today fielding questions from you, maybe filling in gaps in your knowledge or in the things that I didn't cover last time, maybe exploring a little bit about how the game has changed if you are a little more experienced but haven't played much over the break. I'm in the same boat, so we can maybe do a little bit of that to highlight sort of what your work procedures around the game should be as there are new patches. That's one of the things that makes coaching League of Legends and other games on such a fast patch cadence so difficult. But first, I kind of want to just quickly poll those of you that are here and get a feel for everyone's level of experience. So I'm going to hit enter on this post here. And if you wouldn't mind sort of reacting to that with whichever category you think you fall into. Oop, wrong one. Uh, one being sort of absolutely brand new, have never played League of Legends, but I have found myself as the coach of our team. Two being sort of you play a little bit or you watch some, you've never coached. You maybe have a little bit of a grounding in the game, you know, some of the champions, but not as experienced. Three being kind of understanding the game very well, having a little bit of coaching experience, and then four being sort of you should probably be running the session instead of me. Cool. So everyone's kind of right in the middle, which is sort of what I thought. So we'll skip the kind of crash course. Here's how you get your hands around a keyboard and mouse and start playing this game. So let me open it up to the floor. You're either welcome to post in the chat here or just unmute yourself and ask a question. I want to make sure that right up front we kind of meet the need that you came here for today. If there's something specific that you want covered or you have questions on or would just like to discuss to kind of hear another person's outlook on it, do let me know and then we'll start there. And if not, I can kind of just do the Cliff Notes version of what I went through last year and dive into some of the more advanced concepts. But I'll open the floor. Any immediate questions? Any things that you want covered today? See some typing. You're also welcome to come off mic if you'd like. Got some more typing. Cool. So we've got our first question here from Coach Wofford over at Plato. How do we help our kids climb? And then Coach Curtis asks, what do you look for as you build a team? Those are both great questions. I'm trying to think if there's a more logical order to answer them in. I think I'll start with, what do you look for as you build a team? The thing that I say to potential recruits when I'm looking to add people to my team, to my collegiate team, is that I'm looking for someone who has a positive attitude and who can give and receive constructive criticism. So much of this game, and really most esports, is a mental battle. Very much against your opponents, obviously, as it's a tactics strategy game, but also against yourself. One of the reasons that I like League of Legends so much is that over my many years of playing it, I picked up the game around season 3. It has revealed many qualities of myself, some I like, some I very much do not like, and has helped me realize them, become sort of self-aware of the ways in which games can be frustrating to me, right? It's a sort of mental weight to be lifted as a way to practice sort of mindfulness and staying calm and staying focused, because the game is very frustrating. You've all probably had firsthand experience with your players getting frustrated in whatever game they play. But I think League of Legends is sort of uniquely positioned to be extra frustrating. And why is that? Well, the game snowballs, right? And it can be relatively long. If you fall behind but you stay close, that could be a 40, 50-minute game, depending on the meta. And you might have won that game in 20 minutes had your teammate not, monumentally face planted in the first 5 minutes. And so you go over and watch and say, how could they be so bad? How could they make such an obvious mistake? Because you're focused on sort of your own experience and the way in which their mistake has now made your game harder. You now have to play better. You now have to stay even more calm and focused to compensate. So I think that's why this game in particular can be so infuriating at times. So that quality, that ability to go, hey, maybe my teammate doesn't know what I know, and they don't realize the way in which they're making a mistake here. And so my ability to, after the game, take a deep breath and have a frank but respectful conversation with them about what happened and how we can collectively do better next time. The faster your team will improve, the faster they'll gel, the better they'll play overall, even in losses, right? Resiliency in losses is sort of another thing that I look for that's hard to find unless you do sort of extensive scrimming or tryouts or something. But you, being teachers who presumably have some or all of your students, or have had them in class at some point, have a much better idea of sort of their mindset, their attitude. And I would take 5 players with a good attitude that are clearly not as skilled as 5 players with toxic, selfish attitudes. So that's always paramount, especially in this context of it being sort of a means to an end for educational purposes, right? It's a hobby that they partake in because they enjoy it and it's fun, and we are facilitating it because it can also be enriching and a way to learn. In terms of the more concrete strategic elements, if that was more the side of the question, you obviously need a balanced team. So someone to play every role. That can be tough because your role in League of Legends, for those that don't know, is sort of the lane that you play in. It's the position that you play and not necessarily the type of champion that you play, right? So supports can be enchanters or tanks, engaging. In the mid lane, you can play mages or marksmen or assassins or bruisers, right? So having someone with a not necessarily champion ocean, but at least a few good champions that cover kind of the main archetypes, and then 1 or 2 that they're just exceptionally good at. Ideally, those would be sort of also evergreen champions that kind of, regardless of meta, have use and utility and damage. So Orianna, for example, is kind of the classic evergreen mid laner, regardless of the meta. That champion's going to be good. So that might be the deciding factor. And then after that, obviously, it's just who's better. So all other things being equal, they both have good temperaments, they both have good attitudes, they can both communicate effectively. They have, comparable champion pools. Maybe one plays a certain champion that counters another certain champion very well, and in a particular matchup against a certain team, they might be a better choice. But for the most part, the real differentiator there, all other things being equal, is going to be player skill. And thankfully in esports, our games have built-in ranking systems, right? You don't necessarily get that in traditional athletics. They have to actually compete in school or in AAU or something to stack up head to head to get an idea of how good you are. Whereas the game is constantly ranking you, right? At the end of every game, you can sort of summarize your performance with your KDA, your kill, death, assist, score line, your ratio, the amount of gold you got, the amount of minions you were able to successfully last hit. It goes even more granular, even into your runes. You can see like how much damage you got from a particular rune, like how efficiently you used that rune over the course of a game, and then obviously the in-game rank. So to Coach Wofford's question, how do we help our kids climb ELO? That's a big question because it depends on why they're not climbing, right? So here's a way to think about it. There's micro and macro. Micro being sort of the actions related to an individual, one's control of their character. So the precision and speed of one's inputs, combos and animation canceling, and all the things that make you mechanically good or faster or more efficient. And sort of the smaller decisions you make in the lane about trading to get priority, to start to eke out advantages. And then you have the macro, sort of the team-wide strategy. Personally, my peak rank was platinum. There was a year that I lived in South Korea, so I got to plat on the Korean server in the year that I lived there. I wish I could have played more, but honestly, I don't, because I spent my time much better kind of exploring the country and going out and doing things. But did get to play quite a bit of League, so I'm by no means sort of the best player out there, or even close to it. But I've played since season 3, and I'd say I'm all right. I'm pretty good, better than most. Not great, but I'm pretty good. I climbed to that peak rank, and I'm able to sort of maintain gold pretty consistently with the rarity that I actually get to play this game. I watch people play a lot, right? But I don't get to play much myself anymore. And that was mostly from macro knowledge. I have a much better understanding of sort of strategy and where to be when and how to rotate around, be in the right place at the right time so that your team can win the important team fights as the game goes on. And in a solo queue setting where at most 2 of the players are sort of actively coordinating, might be in voice comms, but for the most part, everyone's on their own island thrown together into a random team, right? So that kind of starts to reveal the issues with the ranking system. It would be like trying to rank a basketball player by purely how well they perform in street ball pickup games, right? Obviously, it correlates, and if you're a good basketball player, you'll make a lot of shots. But it doesn't reveal sort of how good you are at maybe playing defense or being part of a team, a cohesive formation, running plays, making the extra pass, right? Like doing the selfless things that help the team succeed. So it's easy to kind of like purely focus on mechanics, get 30 kills in a game, and climb pretty quickly that way because you're just better, right? You get the ball and you shoot and it goes in, so you win. And between a lot of teams, especially at sort of the high school level where there's a very wide gap between the best and worst players across all the teams, right? That's what many games come down to, right? So your team might just be pretty well outmatched and they're just going to lose because the other team is just kind of better across the board, right? It's like, why did we lose the basketball game? Well, maybe everyone on their team was 6 inches taller and much stronger and much faster than us. Well, it's not that we couldn't win, it's just going to be hard, right? So same thing with League of Legends. But how do you actually improve? Well, first it would be figuring out where the deficiencies are. Is it in their mechanics, their micro, or is it in their sort of strategic thinking, their macro? And that takes time. That takes sitting with the player, watching them play. An exercise that I find really helpful is sitting with or behind a player or just having them stream their perspective in a Discord call, and I'm in the call with them. And rather than trying to like backseat game and say like, oh, you should be doing this, you should be rotating, you should be backing here, you should be pushing the wave, just ask them questions. Because most of the time, if one of your players is having a tough time climbing, it's because they have a personal blind spot. They're like, if they knew what their issues were, then they would eventually climb if they actually worked at them. But they're not climbing; they feel stuck, and it's because they have this blind spot. They can't be self-critical enough, self-aware enough, or there's a knowledge gap, right? Like they don't even know what they don't know about what they're doing wrong. Then if you simply watch and prod them, and every so often go, "What are you doing here? What are you thinking? Why are you backing here?" Right? Go Socratic method on them and just pepper them with questions. That will force them to be a little more self-critical and think about their thinking, right? So to the other question of what do I look for as I build a team, or what should you look for as you build a team, I would say like metacognition, or like, I don't know, more broadly, like the ability to learn, right? That's like the skill. If you have that skill, I'll take a player or a participant in any activity, right? You have a kid who wants to join the speech and debate team and they've never done it before, but they're generally fast on the uptake and can see the big pattern in things and can build sort of a map in their mind of like, oh, this skill comes before that and it all builds on each other, right? That's a huge skill. And maybe one of the main things that we ought to be teaching our students, right, is like, you will not have me forever, and you will need to learn more things over the course of your life because there are things that will be important to know that are not yet known, that don't exist yet, right? What's an NFT? Is that important? I don't know, right? But if you have the ability to teach yourself, you'll be much better prepared to face challenges. And that's especially important in a game like League of Legends that changes every 2 weeks, or at least, marginally so, and then massively every year, or sometimes not so massively. This new season patch wasn't too groundbreaking. There's some new stuff, but it's not, a total rework of the game like we've seen in some past seasons. So ask them questions, make them watch back their own gameplay. It's going to take them doing that a couple of times to just get over the initial cringe of watching themselves back, especially if like they're watching VODs of their scrims or competitive matches where they're in comms, right? So hard to teach anything in a VOD review setting when someone is still getting over the like, oh my God, is that what my voice sounds like thing? So getting them comfortable and into a habit of self-reflection, self-review, and then making them focus on the games that they lose. Because it's easy to go back and go, most players only watch a quick 10 or 20 seconds of a replay of a game after they won it to kind of relive how awesome they were in that one moment. And so that is the picture they paint in their mind of like, oh, I'm the guy who got the pentakill and won the game that one time. So how come I'm not doing that this game? It's like, well, because you looked only at your successes and you missed all of the times where your opponent could have punished you and should have, but didn't because they weren't very good either, right? So you get this overinflated sense of yourself, sort of the Dunning-Kruger effect, if you will, of like, man, if only my teammates were better, right? That's what's holding me back. It's like, well, that's an attitude that's never helpful to have. And even though it's occasionally true, right? You play 100 games of League of Legends, at least a few of them are going to be a wash from the start. Someone on your team trolls or goes AFK or literally runs it down mid and dies over and over and over again. And like, you can make a game unwinnable. And it's like, yeah, if only my teammates actually played the game that game, then maybe I would have had a chance. But you write those off as sort of edge cases. Worst case scenario, it's like a third of games, right? And that's what I tell my players is you have to focus on the third of the games that you play that you can win. So a third of games that you play, someone on your team is going to pop off so monumentally that as long as you show up, right, and don't faceplant yourself, then your team's probably going to win. Someone has taken the ball and you just got to pass it to them, and give them a solid screen, and they'll carry the game. Another third of games are like the ones that I just mentioned, where someone on your team is feeding. It's sort of a lost cause from the beginning. There's another third that are totally up to you. Those are the games that you just barely win, that you just barely lose. And if you can win even half of that 1/3 of the total number of games you play, right, then you'll have well over a 50% win rate, right? Because we're assuming a third of the games you win automatically. So all we need is to get to 51%, and then we're climbing. 55%, and we're climbing fast. 60%, and we're skipping divisions, right? So there's a lot of factors in helping your players improve. I think getting them to be self-critical, and then equipping them with the tools to go out and improve on their own, right? Helping them build sort of that mental framework. I was actually up in St. Louis speaking with Chris's team on a campus visit, and I mentioned that. That's sort of like, it's useful almost to build your own curriculum. Like, here is everything that there is to know about League of Legends in sort of like an RPG style skill tree. And let me fill in all the bubbles of things that I feel like I understand or can do consistently, right? And then that gets even more granular for the champions you play. So if your jungler is like, how come I'm not climbing? And they play half their games on Lee Sin to a 40% win rate, and they don't know how to perform an insect kick, right? Then like there's a clear thing they can work on. They can go into the practice tool and repeat that, drill that specific subset skill over and over and over again until they get better at it, right? They can improve the accuracy of their skill shots, right? They might be trying to hit the person where they were instead of where they're gonna be. They're not like thinking enough steps ahead. That's the other piece of this too. If they're a new player and they're saying, how do I climb? That's the wrong attitude to have. If you've played less than 100 games of League of Legends, your goal should not be to climb. Your goal should be to be a sponge, to soak up as much about the game as you can, and to hopefully not build too many bad habits, right? So it depends on the person, I guess, is the very short answer to that question. And I would gladly entertain some follow-ups if there's some things that I touched on you'd like me to flesh out more or explain it in another way, or any other questions that we may have. I'll open up the floor again. Feel free to either type in chat or come off mic and ask a question. You're also welcome to just chime in if you have a thought. If you just say, I agree, and here's an example of why from my own experience, that would also, I think, be helpful to everyone here in attendance, so it doesn't have to just be a question either. But too long didn't read, they just need to play the game more. 9 times out of 10, they need to play the game more, stop blaming their teammates, and ask themselves at the end of every game, what could I have done better? Even if it wouldn't have resulted in a win, right? This was an unlosable game from the start. Well, I at least wasted 20 minutes of being in my own head and thinking that it didn't matter. And so I didn't approach the laning phase seriously. I didn't approach the practice seriously, right? So that's another sort of skill in and of itself, is saying, I am not playing to win today. I am playing to get better. And this is practice. And having the focus for the entirety of the 20, 30, 40 minutes, I didn't autopilot. That is sort of the enemy of the player who wants to climb, the autopilot, the falling back into patterns and habits and not critically assessing the game at sort of every stage. That's where I was going to go with this earlier, was sort of thinking multiple moves ahead. That's why I said you just have to get a certain number of games under your belt. Because once you have been killed by every champion in the game 10 times, you will have built better mental pathways to go, oh, that's what Talon does. That's how Lee Sin kills me. I can't stand here at this point in the lane when the wave is like this and Lee Sin might be nearby because he can easily ward hop flash kick, right? That just takes time. And once you have kind of built up that mental muscle memory, if you will, of what every champion does and kind of what the danger zones are, then you can start to think about the game in multiple steps in shorter amounts of time. So a phenomenon that you might have experienced yourself is like, the better you get, the slower the game feels. Because at first you're just very overwhelmed, and half of your attention or more is just going into making sure that you click your mouse in the right spot. And where are my fingers again? Oh, I pressed F on accident. Bummer, right? So when you're in that mode, it's hard to explain to that player, like, oh, you needed to have taken a step back before that, and then last hit that minion, and then went up to harass him and trade with your opponent when they were going to last hit, right? Like none of that matters to them because they're still learning to walk, right? So it's like I can't teach my basketball team how to run a particular play until the five that are going to be running the play can reliably like dribble the ball while moving and lay it up uncontested 9 times out of 10, right? It doesn't matter how many times we run advanced drills if I can't walk, if I can't dribble, if I don't have basic shooting for it. So most of the time it's just getting them over that hump, and that's why this game is hard and why sometimes people have a hard time sticking with it, or they just play enough until they can play ARAM and they just play with their friends and they don't have the motivation to get better because it just seems so daunting. You have to learn. And the longer you wait, the harder it gets because every time they add a new champion, right? It's not like, oh, that's just one more new champion with 4 new abilities and a passive I have to learn. It's exponential because how does that champion now interact with every other champion and every other type of team composition, right? That team comp's really bad, but now that this new champion's out, that fills the gap in what that composition could be, right? So that sort of it all ties together. Being self-reflective, reviewing yourself, and then once you get past that stage and can start to think about the game in smaller steps and shorter amounts of time, you can then start to interrogate why you're losing against better and better players, right? It's like, well, I just don't even know how he beat me. It's like, okay, well, let's watch it back at a quarter speed and pause. Okay, what is he thinking? Put yourself in their shoes. What is your opponent thinking? What is she thinking? Why is she moving this way? Right? Why didn't they do this instead of this? And you can do that with any streamer. So if you're trying to become a better AD carry, go watch Doublelift play on a stream, and then just ask yourself hold your mouse in your hand, click around, or pretend to click around as if you're playing the game. And every time they do something different than what your instinct tells you to do, ask yourself why. What are they seeing that I'm not? Getting back into our questions here, we have a few more. With the objective bounties added in, how does that change how you play when you're behind or when you are ahead? That's a great question. I'm still learning the answer to this. Ask me again in about a week and a half when we've completed our spring boot camp. I've been intentionally off the grid and out of the game for the last 2 or 3 weeks. But from what I saw right after they were added, my general first thought, and I will give you more thoughts on this as the meta unfolds, but I think it just makes scaling compositions a little better. Last season's meta was very fast. A good team could snowball early and be in a position to win the game by 20 minutes, where it's like, it's 20 minutes, we're so far ahead, in the next 5 minutes, we're going to either catch them out or take the Baron, and then the game's basically over, right? And it was pretty easy to do that. Now with objective bounties, and the fact that they're changing teleport to where you can't TP to a minion or a ward before a certain time in the game, which will make sort of the 3, 4, 5-man bottom gank plays impossible in the early game. So that also slows down the game. It stops a team with like a really aggressive jungler from just TPing their top laner in and diving the bot lane and snowballing. I think it just makes scaling better. But I will give you more thoughts on that as we go. I don't want to present my intuitions as sort of gospel. That's also something to pay attention to as the LCS starts their lock-in tournament and other major regions start playing again. It's just seeing how it plays out. I think it will show pretty quickly in what picks are prioritized, right? So if like late game scaling carries, Tristanas and Jinxes and Cassidans and other things start to see more play, then that'll be a pretty telltale sign that the game is slowing down and being a little more passive through the first 15 minutes and playing for smaller advantages, or rather picking a scaling champion that generally just doesn't win lane and playing to come out even or slightly behind, right? If you're playing a hyperscaler into an early game bully and 20 minutes into the game you're 10 CS down, you're winning really hard, right? Because now it's just a matter of time if they haven't gotten any kills, right? If all other things are equal and they're just a little bit ahead of you because they have a little bit more early pressure, but you stay alive and get most of the farm you can, then you just got to wait another 10 minutes and they can't win. So, but I'll get back to you on that. That's a great question and one we're going to have to keep an eye on as the game unfolds. Maybe someone a little more that's played a little more since the new season started might want to chime in. You can hover over his comment and then click the reply button if you want to. If you have your own thoughts on what you've seen in games and how the objective bounty system is impacting the meta, feel free to reply because I'd love to hear what you guys think. But do you have specific resources you would recommend for players to learn? Streamers, channels, websites? There's so much that it's overwhelming. That's a great question. I have a couple things that I like the most. Pro Guides is generally good, and they have a, let's see, when was this one updated? I want to make sure that this is the most up-to-date one. This is relatively recent. But they have a sort of complete beginner's guide to League of Legends. And I'm actually going to reply to you here. There we go. Okay. So there's that. And then that channel is generally good. If you're learning a specific champion, it's just as easy as typing in the name of that champion and finding a high-level player that plays it well. Doing that thing where I said you watch what they do, interrogate yourself when you have an instinct to do something differently. There's like specific kind of coaches on YouTube that I think are pretty, like Nice is decent. This guy. Let's see. As an example, right? Like, so he does like mostly top lane. But there are other content creators like this who will just either have a player in a call or watch back their VOD and then break down sort of a 5-second interaction that dictated how the rest of the lane played out, right? So a channel like his is especially good for learning the dynamics of a particular lane and how to trade and how to think sort of a few steps ahead. And I have a ton of other resources. I'm going to, when we're done today, I'll go ahead and go through my personal big playlist of how to learn League of Legends videos and share the ones that are sort of still relevant, because some of them were like top 10 tips to succeed in season 5 or whatever. That's irrelevant now. But and then a lot of the sort of pro coaches and analysts have pretty good content as well. I really like, personally, I'm a big fan of Tim Sevenhuisen, Oracle's Elixir. I like the way he thinks about the game from an analytical perspective. So he's great, and he's just recently been making a lot more content. Much of it is kind of focused on sort of analysis of pro play, kind of like a deeper dive of, I don't know, they're like almost segments that you would see on like a talking head show on ESPN, but with more data and whatnot. But those can still be helpful to learning the game. And then the other caveat in that, right, is that like a lot of the content out there is about how to learn to play League of Legends, the solo queue game, which is very similar to, but not exactly the same thing as competitive 5v5 League of Legends. So back to that street ball pickup game analogy, right? Same skills, they're directly transferable, but you add on the dimension of sort of team play. And that is its own kind of thing to learn. There, the question is like, how do you teach a person empathy? How do you help someone improve their listening skills, right? Like those are the key things to getting better at kind of the team game. And then using those skills in kind of a process over time of like actually then reviewing things with your team and having the tough conversations that need to be had, sort of rooting out early any lingering resentment about how the game went, right? Like, oh, we would have won if only, our noob carry freshmen were better, right? It's like, well, upperclassmen leader, why aren't they better? What could you do to make the freshmen better? Right? So that's a general tip for just staying successful over time in any kind of sport or competitive activity is lean on your more experienced players or upperclassmen, and especially as they become seniors, like make sure they're incredibly focused on kind of transferring everything they've learned to the next generation. So teaching, if you have players of various skill levels, even if someone is only marginally better or a little more experienced, have them teach one thing to a player not as skilled as they are, right? And they will get better at, the teacher will get better at what they're doing, what they're talking about by having to teach it, right? Because they might fully understand it, but they haven't bothered to sort of construct a model of the thing they know in their mind, and having to teach it to someone else does that, right? So instead of just going like, well, obviously you do this, it's like, well, why? Well, because you do. Like, well, why? Right? Until they can answer why, as if a child is asking them who doesn't understand anything, why? Right? Until they can do that down to the nittiest grittiest detail of how League of Legends works, right? Then there's more to learn. Hope that started to answer your question there. I'll also share some tools before we finish that are useful for coaches. Some websites and whatnot, but many of which I covered last year. It's all pretty straightforward. But let's see, did I miss any questions? All right. Any other questions, thoughts, feedback? Any concepts you'd like me to discuss more deeply? It could be draft. It could be, how do you practice? How do you VOD review, right? Like what? Anything you would like covered. And like I said, feel free to hop off mic and ask a question or provide a follow-up comment, because there's actually quite a bit of experience and knowledge here that I couldn't possibly have that you have, because you're the ones actually doing it, right? So as always, take everything I say with a grain of salt, because I come from a particular perspective of like, how do I run my college team? But I have a much more pressing goal to win than a lot of high school teams might have, where you want to win, but ultimately it's like, how do I make my students better people through participating in this, right? So you might want to reward starters with playing time based off of their sort of attitudes and whatnot. I feel like someone was going to say something there and I cut them off. Or maybe my mic just... Yeah. Did I miss that? But that is a great question. So depends on how much time you have. In a perfect world, there'd be a lot of different things that I would do. I think the simplest answer, and the one that will be most helpful to you, is don't try to get too cute with it, I guess. Especially if you come from a traditional sports background. It's not one-to-one. There's a lot of things and sort of tools and strategies that you might take from traditional athletics coaching and apply to esports coaching. But one of the most important things with League of Legends when it comes to practice is the fact that it's nearly impossible to drill, especially as a team. I mentioned earlier that like on specific champions, you can practice combos and animation cancels and doing things faster and smoother and more efficient and more accurately. Like you can get better at sort of micro just from the practice tool. But there's no 5-person practice tool or no 10-person practice tool. Something any coach who's been doing this long enough will tell you is like their number one ask is a 10-man practice tool where you can load in a replay file from a game and start the game from, 20 minutes and 15 seconds, right as our team walked into darkness and got wiped at the Baron and lost the game, right? In a perfect world after a game like that, you'd want to play that scenario back 10 times, 20 times until they do it right. That's nearly impossible. You can't engineer that scenario in League of Legends. I've tried to do, especially if I have 2 full teams in-house, and that's even harder because ideally they need to be relatively close in skill. If the 2 teams are too far apart, then it's not really instructive or useful for either of them. So, like I said, I've tried to have 2 teams play a sort of mock game where they just practice like farming for the first 10 minutes and don't do anything crazy or pull any invades or try anything cheeky. So sort of as a warm-up, they spend 10, 15 minutes laning against each other and trying to CS. And, then you say, okay, go fight at Dragon. And then you can say, okay, go fight at Baron. But then you just spent like 20, 25 minutes to get like some laning warm-up and then 1 Dragon fight and 1 Baron fight, right? So, and at that point, it's like, well, why don't we just actually play a game? And so that's where you end up most of the time. It's like you can do some drills, you can do some team warm-up activities. Generally, I tend to keep it as simple as sort of lane matchup, right? Because there's no point playing like it's hard to play a whole game, especially if it goes long, as a warm-up before an actual match, because then you're in the mindset of playing late game League of Legends, which is different from early game League of Legends. And so you want like the first part of the game that they're going to have to actually execute on to be fresh in their kind of mental RAM, as it were. So I prefer to have my players, like my mid and top laner will 1v1, or have the 2 bot lanes play against each other for 5-10 minutes, because that's the thing they're going to go out and do right away, right? And for the jungler, I just have them, do a starting clear and time themselves, right? Just like work on the efficiency of their clear, pulling the camp in just the right spot and those sorts of things. So generally that's what it looks like for us. So say we have a scrim at 6, call time is 5:30, so they have time to go get dinner here on campus. From 5:30 to 6, they'll 1v1 or 2v2. They might just do some CS practice on their own or hop into the practice tool and continue working on learning a new champion or getting combos in their brain and their fingers for the champions that they're likely to play, right? So we've done our pre-draft prep either the day before or we're doing it as we show up at 5:30 if it's a scrimmage, right? And we say, hey, we're probably going to pick Lee Sin here, right? So then the jungler might warm up those mechanics. If there's a very likely pick, like they're almost surely not going to ban this thing and we're first picking at blue side for sure. So go ahead and practice that. 6 o'clock, they get into a scrim. They play 2 to 3 games. Between every game, I reserve the first right to talk, not because I'm smarter or better or know more. Most of the time, one of the players on the team, it might take some prompting and they might need to sort of say some other words first to clear their mind and kind of vent the immediate frustration of having lost. But generally, someone will very quickly. Oftentimes it happens in the game, right? So the game-breaking mistake happens, and as it's happening, just before it happens, right, someone will say, this is bad, we shouldn't be, oh no, and then they wipe, right? So they're generally pretty good at recognizing their own mistakes, but I always reserve the first right, especially between games in a match, or games in a scrimmage to chime in with the first thoughts to say, hey, I was watching from a bird's eye view, and I was also listening to you talk. And the players, while they're playing, it's much harder for them to look at the whole screen and remember everything in the level of detail that I can, because they're mostly focused on piloting their champion, right? And then somehow communicating on top of that and paying attention to bright, colorful, fast stimuli coming up every couple of seconds for 40 minutes, right? So because I'm not doing that and I have the clarity of seeing the game from the top down, I chime in with 1, 2, or 3 points of like, looking good until this happened, right? We were ahead until we tried to force our lead on this gank, and it would have worked. It was a good timing, but you guys didn't, communicate the comboing or the layering of your CC effectively, or exactly when to go in, right? And then we did this well, and even though we won, that Baron that we took to win the game was a little sloppy, right? It was a 50-50. We took it with their jungler up. We didn't have vision over the Baron wall. We didn't stop damage like we've talked about right before. We're going to execute the Baron to bait the jungler to come in, and then we kill him and then turn on the Baron, right? So I'll hit him with the highlights and then say, what do you guys think? Any thoughts, any follow-up, any concerns, anything you want to share? They'll generally be in agreement. If I'm off base, someone will go, actually, it was this. And then I'll go, actually, you're right. Or I'll go, we're actually both right. That happened because this happened. Or rather, both of the things we're talking about happened. They were the result of something at minute 3, right? Where you took a bad trade and then you were forced to back. And had you been there from minute 3.5 to 4, you would have been able to push the wave so that their jungler couldn't roam to kill our jungler, or, whatever. I try to save the more in-depth analysis for after the conclusion of the match. Or if it was particularly contentious or frustrating, or especially if it was just a blunder, right? The series is 1-1. We're 50 minutes into game 3, and someone gets caught out. And they know they got caught out, and we were otherwise about to win the game, but we threw. And it's really obvious why. And everyone's frustrated about it. Then I'll say, all right, good work tonight, everybody. Let's talk about it tomorrow, and we'll pick it up fresh in the next VOD review session. But for 9 times out of 10, I always try to vent some of the pressure, right? There needs to be some kind of pressure release valve right after the game. And if it's really contentious, or someone made a particularly boneheaded mistake, especially if it's one that's been talked about over and over and has already been a source of conflict, right? Those are the times. This is something I've struggled with over the last couple of years, right? My players are a little older; they're adults. I have to hold them a little more accountable from time to time, and as I've mentioned, this game can be very frustrating. So there have been some times where I've raised my voices with my players. Often not to good effect. Most of the time that doesn't help. You're just introducing more noise and chaos into the system when it's mostly your job as the coach to bring that out, or to create a positive environment where people can vent their frustrations, but where we don't tolerate sort of pointed arguments or yelling or denigration, which, to be clear, is not what I'm doing. I'm not swearing at them or insulting them, but it's more like, hey, we've talked about this for the last 3 weeks after every practice, and then when faced with that scenario in a game, no one brought up the thing we talked about, and we collectively made the same mistake again, right? It's something like that. Anymore, I've personally come to the conclusion, at least with my current team, that it's does more harm than good. But occasionally, and very rarely, I will preemptively steal someone's angry thunder. So if it looks like someone's about to burst and start whining or complaining, then as soon as the game ends, I'll just hit them with like, what the heck, and just I'll be the angry one. And then they have no choice but to band together against me. So I've done that a handful of times where it's like, all right, I'm going to be the bad guy so that the 4 of you can't make the 5th player a bad guy. Coach Curtis says, that is some pretty clear examples of how you remove the cringe of watching yourself. I can see how this becomes the highlight of your practices. I also appreciate you sharing that it doesn't work perfect and that it is goal. And that's a goal. And we are in the process of receiving and giving feedback effectively. Yeah, 100%. I've learned so much about myself and the way I think and what sort of gets under my skin from working with the team. And sometimes, unfortunately, I have vented that in unhelpful ways. But by being aware of that and then having the humility to say to the team, whether it's that day or later, right? Like, hey, that was sort of out of line. Or I realize now that that wasn't helpful. And I apologize. Because that is the behavior I expect from them. And I'm not perfect. So I can model it. At the same time, I need to hold myself to a higher standard. And so I've been particularly watchful of my own frustration when I watch them play, right? Because it's almost more frustrating as a coach because you've talked about it over and over and over again, and there's nothing you can do about it. You're not playing the game, right? So you can't play for them. And most of the time, you can't even really talk to them. In an organized competitive environment, the coach is not allowed to say anything by the rule sets. In scrimmages, especially earlier on in a semester or earlier on in a season, I will be in comms with them. And one of the first things we'll do at the start of a new semester is sort of rebuild our internal checklist. So I'm just going to share my screen, actually. I'm going to create a new doc here and share my screen and show you what I mean. So let's go like that and share your screen. Screen 1. Cool. Can everybody see this blank Google Docs window? Cool. Looks like everyone can see that. So here's what I mean. We'll start a semester with like kind of rebuilding our checklist. And I'll actually use checkboxes just because visually it looks nice. So where does the game begin, right? At 0001 on the clock? No, the game begins like an indeterminate amount of time before the beginning of draft, right? But okay, so there's draft. What are we thinking about in draft? What are we trying to do? What is our win condition? How do we win the game? Who is our carry? What is their win condition? Can I make that bigger? Yes. How's that? Let me know if that's better for you, Curtis. So in draft, what are we thinking about? We're thinking about our win condition. We're thinking about their win condition. At the sort of and there's the loading screen. So the time after the draft, where I have another 30 seconds or so to impart some wisdom on the team and remind them of all of the things that we've been practicing. So what am I reminding them of? I'm reminding them of our win condition and their win condition, right? So we're thinking about that before the draft because it influences what we draft. Then we ask ourselves that question again, right? What do our comps do in the loading screen? So what are they trying to do? Oh, they have a much stronger top side. Their jungler ganks better early, and they have a winning top lane matchup. Okay, so we're conceding top, and we're going to gank bot a lot. We might even vertical jungle, right? Whatever. We have that conversation on the loading screen. What do our comps do? What is our jungle clear? So where is our jungler starting? And then, are we invading or are they invading? That gets into the start of the game. So you could call this sort of the rollout, right? So it's easy in solo queue to get into that habit of like, oh, the game starts at like a minute 15 or wherever when the minions meet or when we finally go to lane. No, the game starts as soon as you leave the pad. You should be getting off the pad immediately. You should pre-position yourself at the edge of the pad, buy your items, be ready to move off it as soon as the gates drop. In a competitive sense, right? Because if my team gets there 2 seconds ahead of you, that's the game, potentially, right? So in the rollout, are we invading, right? We could probably put that here. So invade. We either attack or defend on that. And this will be a collaborative process, right? So I will come up with this list with the team. So I'll say, in draft, what are we thinking about, right? In the loading screen, what are we talking about? What am I reminding you of? Okay, now the game has started. We roll out. Are we invading? Cool. Or do we just, come out in a 5-point? 5-point being sort of the line of scrimmage start. You send someone mid and have them stand just ahead of the mid tower so that no one on their team can sneak into your jungle through the mid lane. And then you position everyone else at one of the sort of entrances to your jungle. And if they are moving in as 5, top or bot, then if you're 5-pointing correctly, then you can spot that and kind of just vacate. And then if they continue to go into your jungle, then your players on the other side of the map can respond by invading their jungle, right? So there's a bunch of different ways to play out the first minute of the game. So then we've got the sort of early laning phase. Here we want to think about primarily, where is their jungler? Right? So jungle tracking is huge. Where did they start? Well, how do we do this effectively in the early laning phase? Well, really, in the rollout, and this is how this will develop, right? We won't think of it all sequentially. We'll start going, okay, well, in the early laning phase, we should be tracking their jungler so we know where he might gank. Well, how do we do that? We need to know where he started, which is part of the rollout. So we'll go back and say, okay, after we've determined sort of, and kind of as we're determining, really, because if we're invading, are we doing it to like hide in the brush next to their red buff and surprise them? Or are we just moving in force to deter them from fighting us just enough to get a ward on like their raptor pit? There could be different reasons for the invade, and one of them might be to place early wards to spot jungler. Now, how do you do this? Do you just have to guess that he's going to start red and then go place a ward on the red, and then they go there and you go, hey, he started red? Not necessarily. As long as you have a ward somewhere, once the first camps spawn, you'll have some information, right? So there are better places to ward than others, but what I'm getting at is deduction, right? Inference. Well, I put a ward on his blue, and he's not there when it spawns. The only other camp up right now is red, so he's probably on red, right? And then we'll do this for the whole game. So what else is happening in the early laning phase? We want to think about sort of priority and tempo, if I could spell, which is kind of related to the idea of trading. And we'll make this more and more detailed. So in the early part of the season, especially in our first couple of scrims, I'll sit with this document in my hand and be in comms, sitting over one of their shoulders as they play, generally the jungler, because he's the one moving about the map and where the early action is going to follow. And I'll say, okay, how are we rolling out? And as we go, I might say less and less. I'll just say, roll out. Are we invading? What's happening? Where are we starting? Where are we ganking? Right? Where's our jungler? Where's their jungler? And I'll just poke and prod at them until it becomes second nature for them. Once you have your complete list, you can also sort of divvy it up, right? So if you have one player in particular who's just a wonk about draft and knows what all the champions do and loves that, it can be their job to remind the team to think about all of these things in draft. Then your jungler is like the one who tells the team where he plans to start based off of the jungle matchup, because that will inform where everyone else needs to go during the invade, et cetera, et cetera. And then as you get into the late game, you're like carry, mid laner, or AD carry might be responsible for the stuff later in the list. So you can break up that responsibility. All the while, your support is timing summoners, right? Because they have generally have the least mechanical demand through the early game. They're not last hitting. So they have an extra second or two occasionally to do this thing, which is like mid flash. It will be back up. Let's say he flashed it 5 minutes, 30 seconds, right? So mid flash 10:30, it'll be back up in 5 minutes. Select all. except this will, not be here. Select all, copy, paste, enter, copy, paste, enter, copy, paste, and do that really quickly to repost the summoner timers in chat, right? So everyone has a job throughout the game. And to the extent to which they can remember these things that they talked about outside of the game and build that mental checklist, the less they'll have to actually prompt themselves to do it because it'll become second nature. And then you can focus on the next more advanced things, right? So like basically everything here is second nature to my team. I don't need to prompt them anymore to discuss both teams' win conditions while considering the draft. My jungler automatically tells the team where they're thinking about starting and what direction they intend to clear in and how many camps they intend to take, because that influences that. And so they start to do this automatically. Then, after our next practice, I'll bring that back. So we spend the first week or two focusing on playing the first 10 to 15 minutes of the game well, and we play teams that are much better than us, and we hold our own for 10 minutes, right? Then we get into the mid to late game where we have to start fighting around neutral objectives and we get slammed. Okay, well, we're pretty good at the first 10 minutes. Now let's focus on that. This is all second nature. So in our next VOD review, we're going to talk about, how to fight at Baron. Generally, we need vision. There's the idea of the Baron dance that vision lasts for a certain amount of time. So one team moves in together, places all of their vision, then they have to back, then the next team comes in, clears it, places their own vision, and back and forth if the game is equal. And so you try and get that timing to match up with the Baron will come up while we have our vision out. And then we want to control space. So if we're trying to take the Baron, but they're all alive, we don't want to just start it, because the Baron hits us too and applies a debuff to us that makes the other team do more damage. So if they get the jump on us while we're in the Baron pit, it's basically a 5v6 fight. The Baron fights for them. So we need to control space. We're not actually going to start the Baron. We're going to move into their jungle, clear brushes, make them fear the darkness, right? Then, and in doing so, we're going to look for a pick. We might not even get a kill, but we might take out most of their jungler's health or force them to burn their smite on a nearby minion to get health back. Cool, now we have an advantage. Even if they don't die, they may have to back. So we look for an advantage, then we start the Baron. As we're starting it, someone must call out what we are doing here. Burn or turn, right? Are we fighting the Baron to bait them into coming into the river, and as soon as they do, we're going to peel off it and fight them? Or are we trying to burn it as fast as we can because we have a small window where we have a numbers advantage or their jungler's not on the map, right? If burn, right? This is the language that I use with my team. I don't know that this is widely used language, but I like to say, what is the magic number? The magic number is the current amount of damage that the jungler's smite does, plus all of the true damage that you can do on top of it from a Cho'Gath ult or Callista Spears or whatever. That's the number. Well, it's that plus a couple hundred damage to reflect 2 or 3 of our carries pressing one of their big damage buttons. All at the same time to blow up the Baron like that. Right? So what's the magic number? That's the number of Baron health at which we blow them up. Or blow up the Baron to try and take it quickly before their jungler can try and steal it. Right? So, and we'll go into great detail about how we position and fight around the Baron. And then I might be in their comms and won't say anything until we get to here. And then I'll go, all right, remember our checklist. How are we setting up? Are we burning or turning? Why are we here? What's the point? How are we going to play this out? Right? After the take, then what? If it was close or a sneak, look to back right away. If we're going to do that, and they're close by, we can't just hit B, even with the fast Baron recall. We probably need to leave a little bit, to retreat into our territory. So someone must call a escape route. So what this looks like is we're moving towards the Baron. The support's like, I'll move up. I'm warding. I'm clearing. Staying with me, right? Pick this guy, right? Okay, now we go to Baron. Cool. Baron, yeah. All right, we're burning. The magic number is 1500. Ready? Support's like, I see them coming. The jungler says, we can burn it. They won't get here in time. They're pretty close. We can get it. We burn it. Now, everyone bursts it. It's gone. They're close. Someone immediately says, up, meaning they're wrapping around the Baron pit from the mid lane. So we're going to run together to our sort of tier 2, either up into the top lane and down or through the jungle, right? You don't have to verbally say all of this. You can ping some of that information. But the idea needs to be that, like, we've thought about this, and with the little bit of time we had leading up to it, and while we were doing the Baron, we were already talking about the next step. So that's just a general thing I teach my team, is like, always ask yourself what's next. If there's any moment of silence, someone should go, what's next? What are we doing? What's the next thing we're trying to do? And the next thing we're trying to do might be stay alive for a minute, find a time to base and spend the gold, give them the dragon, and then fight them in 5 minutes. Right? We have a scaling composition. There's no way we can win the game in the next 5 minutes, but we can lose it. So the next thing we need to do is nothing. And the team proactively made the decision to do that. Right? That's better than actually doing nothing, just letting the game happen to you. Right? So they have to be proactive about every step of the game. And one of the ways to do that is to break the game down into phases. So to the original question of, like, how do we practice, right? Show up at 30 minutes to an hour before the scrim or match, warm up individually, either in the practice tool or in 1v1s or a jungle clear or CS practice. Have a little bit of time to talk about draft. We look at their op.gg. If it's a team we've played a lot or that we're going to see in the regular season and we have some data on from previous matches, then we'll get into some more scouting and tendencies. We might watch some of their VODs, or we will have been watching their VODs in the week prior. Excuse me. 10, 15, 20 minutes or so, maybe while they're warming up, where we talk about draft. We might even do a mock draft or two where we sort of try and game it out, where it's like, okay, they're really good at this champion and we're really good at this champion, but, like, if we ban their best champion and then they ban ours, then that means that their next best champion is the best champion in the game. So sometimes it might be better, you know, if you think far enough ahead, to give away certain things so that we can get certain things, right? There's a lot of calculus there. We have those discussions leading up to the start of the game. Then we draft, play the first game. I step in after the game with highlight thoughts, have a brief discussion, get back into game 2. Another quick tip, have them stand up and walk away from their computer, ideally stand or sit in a circle and look at each other in the eyes. If someone is going to offer a critique of the team or an individual's performance, they should have to say it to them. This also helps them get out of the autopilot zone, where, you know, as they start a new game, you want them to be approaching it fresh. This is especially hard if you play the same champion into the next game. Like, if you play Jinx for 50 minutes and pop off in the late game and get a pentakill, and then you start the next game playing Jinx, you're going to be, like, trying to run around and shoot everybody and wondering why your attack speed isn't high, and then you're stepping too far out and getting killed, and right. So that little bit of a mental reset between games is helpful. Then we'll finish the match, do some final thoughts, major takeaways. We might even add some things to sort of our checklist, or add some champions to the list of champions we want to work on, right? It's like, sometimes that'll happen after a full scrim block. It's like, hey, we could have beat that team, but when they banned our champion that we were depending on to be able to beat them, we didn't have another option. And if our top laner could play Jax or something when this other champion gets banned, then we'll be a much more well-rounded team, right? So there might be some big systemic things, especially early on in the season. We'll finish a scrim block and I'll be like, we need to completely review how to fight at the Baron, because we did none of these things, even though we talked about that all fall, right? Or it might just be, Yeah, we worked on everything. We're doing well. We're implementing everything we talked about. We just need to be able to play Kled, right? And that might be what comes out of practice, is that we just add something to this list, or something, a champion to our big board. Chris says this speaks directly to what Clerky was talking about last year regarding improvement-driven practices. 100%. That's a general principle of really coaching anything, but especially in esports, this can be tough because their competition is also their primary hobby that they might play to relax. So you need to differentiate and compartmentalize. I'm playing League of Legends to turn my brain off and relax, or I'm training at League of Legends and therefore need to have my brain at high RPMs for 40 minutes, right? Those are two different, completely different mental states, and require sort of the right set and setting, if you will, the right kind of prep from you, the coach. So even just simpler things. This is something that I know Chris does with his program as a whole. They have whole team meetings and will do a 5, 10, 15-minute chunk on mindfulness, and they'll literally turn the lights down and have everyone go, breathe in through your nose and out. Focus on the sensations around you. Like, a little bit of that is great too. I generally have them do that anyway. After the warm up before the first game, I have everyone stand up, look at each other, stretch out their wrists slowly, right? Check in with their posture. It's all kind of overlaps at some point. I've been talking a while about the question of how do you practice. That's how we practice. There's no right or wrong way. I think it's pretty effective in the scholastic environment because you have a limited amount of time. You might have 2 or 3 nights a week. So, like I said, don't get cute with it. Don't try to do too many crazy drills. Just play the game. Make sure they're focused. And especially if you're scrimming with another team that you know, another coach that you know, and you're on the same page, don't be afraid to abandon a game as well. You get 15 minutes in and one team is crazy far ahead, unless you're like actively trying to practice how to come back from behind, because that weekend you're going to have a match against a team that's way better from you, and this much better than you, and this is probably the scenario you're going to be in, therefore you want to practice it. You can do that, but it's pretty common, not so much with my team, but a lot of teams will, especially if they're working well with the other team and they're kind of on the same page and training together. They might go, yeah, this game's pretty this is pretty over, yeah, let's restart. And that can be effective too, especially if you have 2 teams in house. Instead of playing 2 or 3 full matches, play 10-minute blocks, especially early on in the year if you're trying to practice the early game, that kind of thing. You can kind of drill in that way. But for the most part, it's warm up, plan, review your notes, your goals, your intentions from last time. Hold those new intentions in your mind. Maybe even write it on a sticky note and put it on your monitor, like the 1 or 2 things that you're going to focus on this game. If nothing else, win or lose, I will focus on CSing, or harassing them when they go to CS, or paying more attention to the wave state, or whatever it is, right? Playing the game, quick bit of feedback, quick bit of discussion / pressure valve release. Next game, rinse, repeat. Next game, final thoughts after the match. Either right after or the next day, do some film review before the next practice, and then loop ad nauseum. That's the best way that I've figured out how to do it for League of Legends so far, with the amount of time that I have with my players, right? Oftentimes we'll even skip VOD review. I hate to do it, but it's like, we got 6 hours this week because someone has to work, or we're going to be leaving a day early to travel to a thing or whatever. So we're just going to get some games in. It's especially on a new patch or something. It's like, all we need to know is like, is this champion that got buffed good? And if so, how do we as a team play around it, and how do we draft around it, right? Like, oh, Tristana mid is really good right now. Okay, well, if we're playing Tristana mid, that means we're probably not playing a mage, which means we need more AP damage somewhere else. So our top laner is going to play an AP carry, but that means he's not on a tank, so we can't have an enchanter, so we need a tank support now, right? Like, you can see very quickly how changing one thing has cascade effects in how you think about the game and plan your practice and training regimen. Did that answer your question? I think it did. Someone said, can you share this document with us? Yes, I will. I have a better version of it, a more fully featured version of it that I will share with you gladly. This sort of checklist of how to think about the game. All right, let's see. Are there any other questions that I may have missed? Curtis said, "What an awesome example of how to think through a game. It's making me think about this process in all my games, like Overwatch and Smash as well." Yeah, a lot of this definitely translates across games. Some of it is league specific because it's such a specific, idiosyncratic game. But yeah, a lot of it is widely applicable. The need for sort of self-reflection is paramount across every esport. It's so much a mental game. Right, like you don't have to lift weights with your fingers to get better at clicking. You just need like better mental clarity, mental control, precision. See some people typing. Also, like I said, as always, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question or add in some other comments. There is a lot of wisdom in here. So any other questions, any thoughts, any concerns, anything that you'd like me to maybe touch on a little more? If not, I have at least one other cool activity we could do that'll serve as a means for us to talk about sort of all of the concepts at once, and that's a mock draft. So we might just do that here in a moment, but I want to make sure that sort of all the primary questions and things that you wanted to get out of this experience are handled before we have a little bit of fun. So any other questions, feel free to chime in if there's something you want to know. I see some typing. Any other questions? Let's see. +1 for mock draft. Cool. We'll hop into that, and if you have any other questions, feel free to type them in, and we'll get back around to them before we finish up. Let's do a little mock draft here because this will serve as a means of applying all of these concepts kind of in real time. So, in a perfect world, we would have some additional context here. Does anyone have their team's op.gg handy? Do you know your roster for this spring? And if so, can you share your team's multi-op.gg link? And I will take one of the teams, and one of you can draft for your team. And that way we can kind of go through the first step of the draft phase as well, which is kind of the scouting and planning based off of that information. While I wait to see if anyone is willing to share their team's op.gg, I will show you just the two main things used for drafting in League of Legends outside of the client. This is especially handy and almost necessary in a tournament setting where your players probably don't have all of the champions unlocked. So this is the only way to make the draft completely fair, right? That a team isn't limited. You obviously still have to own the champion to play it. The difference between these two, this one is actually like on the official League of Legends website or like under their domain, despite the fact that it's not secure for some reason. I like this other one a little better, draftlol.dawe.gg. The reason is that this one has a few more features and the timer is also more akin to what you see in the actual game. In Pro Draft, when the timer hits 0, it immediately ends the pick and goes to the next one. Whereas in actual League of Legends and in Draft Law, there's a bit of a forgiveness window where it like sits at 0 seconds for another second or two, which is really helpful because a lot of the time picks change at the last second. So go. ProDraft doesn't like our school security software. Bummer. So we'll go ahead and use this. And then we got one op.gg. If you have a list of summoner names, you can just copy and paste it into op.gg.com. You need commas between them for it to know where one name ends and the other begins. Another point is caps and spaces don't matter. So there's no difference between this and this, or this and this, right? Cool. So here's a team. Do we have another team? Ideally, one around this level, so like bronze, silver average. So I can kind of show you what the process is like, assuming teams of sort of equal skill. Let's say if I compare this to our league team, the draft doesn't really matter. We're gonna win. No offense. And same thing, if this team played a bunch of brand new players, doesn't really matter what they pick. They're gonna win. Anyone else have a roster handy? If not, let me see if I can just find one for, let's see. I should have one from a previous tournament that we ran. Give me just a second, and then we'll get going with this. Let's see. Those are collegiate teams. No, that's fine, Jeff. I can pull together another team. Just trying to find the high school tournament that I ran. My roster from that. Or here, let's just do this. I'll let Jeff. Jeff, are you able to take one of these links to draft? Are you at home? Your school. You're not on your school network to have it block you. Because what we can do, I think the quicker thing to do here now would actually just be to put together a team of us. So anyone who is in here who is silver to bronze, maybe a little gold, that wouldn't mind sharing their op.gg or their summoner name, just typing it in here, we'll assemble an ad hoc team. Oh, no, wait, we got one. We got another roster. Awesome. Cool. Thank you. This will work. This is perfect. All right. So I'll draft for MRH, and Jeff, you can draft for your team if that's all right. I'm going to take blue side. Plato can be red side. And then you can just hit copy all here and like post this in the game lobby, right? So I'll click blue. Jeff will pick red. And then everyone else can click spectator if you want to follow along. But I'm also streaming, so you can watch my stream and you'll see everything as well. But the spectator mode is there for like all of your other players, right? So generally either you or one of your players should be the person running the draft. I like to be the one to do it. I retain sort of like final authority on what we pick. I just 99 times out of 100 defer to what the players want to pick. I'm just there to propose alternatives. And to remind them of things that we learned in scouting and a few other things. And then every once so often, my experience will show through and I'll go, I'm telling you, this is the pick. And then I'll let them make their mistake so I can go, see, I told you after the game. So here's the Plato team. Here's our team. This is the team I'm going to draft for. Let's go ahead and look at their previous season because there's not many games played this season just yet. So, here's my team. I've got a gold player, 2 gold players. One looks to be a fill player, full on fill player, mid, carry, top, carry, support, jungle, / support as of last season, carry. So they're kind of all over the place. This is a jungler, although maybe they're going to be playing support this season because they've been spamming some Seraphine. We've got a Malphite. Okay. So this is perfect because this is pretty common, even in like the collegiate space. So 2 full diamond rosters are playing. There are still 1-tricks, right? So this person plays Malphite. Pretty safe bet that they're silver, maybe even gold. Well, 500 games. But maybe bronze or lower on these other champions, right? So not knocking that, but you can already start to see how this causes us trouble, right? So what is my opponent going to ban? Probably Malphite, right? They'll say, show me anything else. So this is something that we have to think about and draft around. And we've got sort of another kind of fill player, mostly support, but a lot of Fiora games. Mostly Fiora. So Coach Curtis, you tell me, who is who? What is our roster here?
That was pretty spot on. I'm Math Rocks. I mostly do mid.
Okay.
I Am Sabian is Adam from MOSEF, and he does our jungle. Great
Okay.
Gambino only plays Malphite.
So
Fly
jungle
Guy.
is I Am Sabian.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just writing these down as I go.
Yeah.
You said Fly Guy was what?
He plays top, but he can't play support.
Okay.
And then Artemis can play anything that's Coach Alley from North County, and but she is mostly plays ADC for us.
Cool. So Artemis is generally the AD carry. So then Great Gambino is support?
He can play support or top.
Gotcha. So this is what I have. This is what I'm going to go off of drafting for this game. If that's all right. If my opponent doesn't ban Malphite, then I might pull a last minute swap. I really wish, even with my ad block on, I could actually block all of these ads. I apologize. And then this is in positional order, you said. So top, jungle, mid, AD carry, support from left to right. Yes, cool. So looking at the other team, we've got some question marks. Their mid laner doesn't really play any mid lane champions. Not that we know of anyway. At the same time, they're one of the lower ranked players, so maybe we don't have to worry about that much. They have sort of 2 silver players. That is not the order. What is the order? If you wouldn't mind typing it up for me. Okay. We've got a lot of Rise. So Evolution is top. Eyes is jungle. This is mid. Then Lego Master is AD carry. Kalane is support. Correct? Kellyanne. Cool. Okay. So some of these champions could be played support. And then Porcus is mid. So Rise. That can be very scary. Someone who's very good at Rise could take over a game. So let's first figure out what I want to do. Right? My best player is my mid laner. Played a lot of games on Xerath. That's almost surely going to get banned, right? So then what else are we prioritizing? That's tough. What do you guys think? Feel free to post your comments. Generally, and this was last season, so the meta may have changed significantly, but generally what I've tried to do is take the jungler in the first 3, because that's going to define kind of how our early game goes, and then match what my opponent does. So on blue side, I get the first pick. I'm going to take either my jungler or a very strong meta pick that one of my players can play that isn't banned. Then I'll see what my opponent takes 1-2 on red side. Let's say they lock in their full bot lane. I'll match that so that I don't have to show anything extra. And I can see more of their team before I have to make any blind picks. What do I mean by blind picks? Well, I'm first picking. Maybe I want to take my mid laner. Maybe they don't ban Xerath. Well, if they don't ban Xerath, that almost surely means that they have a plan. They are fine with me taking it because they know that there's something they can play into it that will either hold its own or beat it. So I already have to start second guessing myself. And that's what I mean by sort of getting counterpicked and picking blind. So I might want to wait later to see if they pick their mid laner. Then I can make my choice of mid lane with more knowledge of what they have or what their team comp is shaping up to be. If I were red side, I would probably pick for my mid laner last because I can guarantee that I'll see their entire team comp, right? So I generally like to pick for my best player or one of my best players, my primary carry, last so that I can ensure they're going to get a favorable matchup. That's the main dynamic between blue and red side. On red side, you get to do that. You get to guarantee that at least one of your players gets a full counter pick. Now, the downside of that is there might have been something that they wanted to play that either got picked or banned before it got to them. But if they have a wide champion pool, right, they're totally fine waiting to see the entire enemy's team composition before they decide what they're going to play. Okay. Generally, what I'll do with my team is come up with our first 3 bans, sort of our gut feeling of like, what are they incredibly good at and or what is going to be really annoying for us, right? So like this guy doesn't play a ton of Ashe, but maybe for my AD carry, that champion just playing against it doesn't click with him, right? We do this a lot with Thresh, where our support plays quite a bit of it, but there are some games where it's just like, man, Thresh would be really annoying right here, especially with what they have, or like, we don't have anything else to ban, so let's take away the most annoying thing. Or let's just take away Ezreal so that their AD carry can't dash away from us, right? So there's a lot of factors that go into it. Let's just go ahead and get this underway. Jeff, are you ready? So this is my opponent. Generally, before the start of the game, I'll come up with sort of 3 bans. Jeff is watching me, so I'm not going to say them out loud, but I have settled. Wait for it. I've settled on my bans. Yes, I've settled on my bans. Okay, let's do it. So this is me. I have to make some bans. I like to think and discuss with my team through the entirety of this clock. Unless we've already locked in the exact strategy, then I'll try and do it as quickly as possible to take away time where they can think. So, geez, I'm already messing up. That was Yone. I meant to do Yone there. Sorry about that. This is Yone. All right, Malphite coming in. Here's another tip. Don't focus too much on the hover, right? If this seems likely, then we'll game out for as long as it's their turn, what it might be if it's Malphite. But if they're like hovering Teemo, then we'll go, all right, let's, what are they actually going to pick here? And we'll spend that time thinking and continuing to refine our idea. Let's see. This is them. Cool. So these are pretty obvious. I'm targeting champions they play a lot, that they play well. Maybe that I don't want to play into, based off of what I have. Xerath makes sense. So this is a tough one, right? They've been playing a ton of Rise recently. Of the other things they play, not too scared about it. At least not yet. Maybe my tune will change after game 1. But for right now, I'm going to do this. Why? Because that's what they've been playing. So show me something else. Make them uncomfortable. Now, of course, this was 2 months ago, right? So, but assuming this was like active in the season. Sivir, okay? So now what do I want to first pick? Excuse me. What do I want to take? Malphite's off the board. If there's something powerful and that can be flexed, then that might be good. Let's see here. You know what I think I'm going to do, actually? I'm going to do that. Why? Because what does their support play? I don't actually really know, but they're all kind of melees. That's what it looks like. So they can walk into my binding. And then this also kind of preemptively discourages Blitzcrank, Leona to some extent, right? Nautilus, Thresh. Already it makes some of these high priority things go down. What it also does is maybe pressures them, haha, very smart, to break up my synergy, right? So I have Morgana. Morgana's really good with Caitlyn. So here's the next kind of head fake. Maybe I wanted them to do that, which I haven't put that much thought into this specific draft, but maybe let's say I did. Because I know that one of our champions can beat a Caitlyn. So we engineered a scenario where they kind of have to pick it, where they give us something strong. Seraphine. That's a pretty good answer into this, right? They stay away from the morgue. They can trade pretty well. Stay safe. So what do I take? I really want Sivir here. It's off the board. So in hindsight, maybe I should have taken Caitlyn. Then they have to go Morg or Seraphine or something, and then I can respond. But what I think I'm going to do is take Jinx, even though I don't know if our carry plays much of it. The other thing might have been Ashe, but I personally like Jinx's range into Caitlyn. Caitlyn has one of the longest ranges outside of like Tristana at level 18 or something, but Jinx with the rockets can kind of trade pretty well. And like they're non-interactive for the most part. They can bully pretty early with the Caitlyn Seraphine, actually, but we're going to just hold on and scale. So, who's my jungler again? I'm going to go Xin Zhao. Why? Because I have a scaling bot lane. And they can support and follow up the Xin Zhao fairly well. I need a tip of the spear, so I'm going to take the literal spearman. So already I'm kind of showing that I'm playing for late in my bot lane, which means I'm probably angling for strong early to mid game solo laners that can rotate around. Kindred. Okay, so we're matched. We sort of followed each other. I took a support, so they took their bot lane, including their support. I rounded out my bot lane, took my jungler, they took their jungler. This is pretty standard. This is how a lot of drafts, at least last season, went. This may change as we go into this season. All right, so they know that I need strong carries, so they're going to start banning my carries, particularly my like kind of premier ones. They also need solo laners, so they need Porcus and Evolution. Their bot lane's a little stronger, and I don't want them to have a scaling top laner, so I'm going to take away the Gangplank. Might even take away the Kale as well. We'll see. How much did they play that in the past? Not much. They were really a jungler in the past. And Malphite's already off the board. You could play a marksman top. They very well could go Xayah or Kai'Sa top, and that would be very annoying and something I have to keep in mind. They're going to take the Teemo off the board as well. What does that leave my top laner? Not a ton, I'll tell you that much. What do I ban from them? Oh yeah, I'm going to do this just because it's annoying. My Jinx wants to run in, my Xin Zhao wants to dive in. So running through a bunch of laser beams sounds bad for me. Is that the thing to ban? I don't know. You could make an argument for a lot of other things. If I played this team a lot, or I have previous games to look back on, I can make better judgments about what they're likely to play or what they're likely to follow up with. This champion's a little newer, I'll be honest. I don't know what's good here, so let's check. This is not the Bible, this is not gospel, right? But in Platinum plus solo queue, Victor tends to be good into Vex. Do we play Victor? Not really. What do we play? What do I take here? I'm running out of time. I actually don't know what to take here. I've lost my window already. Probably Echo, I guess is what I took. Let's just say that. And this happens sometimes, especially early on in the season. You don't know your team as well. It's like, I don't know, pick something. So we'll say Echo. That kind of fits with what I wanted, like a strong solo laner that can fight. I don't know if it's good into Vex. Actually kind of seems bad into Vex, but I don't know. And then this is tough as well, because they haven't picked their top laner yet. So they get pure blind, or I had to blind. They get all information. They know everything else about the team. This was Echo, by the way. So they need to ask themselves not only what is going to be good into Aurelia, or what can at least hold its own against Aurelia if we're playing around bot side, but also what does my team comp need? That's maybe something I didn't ask myself as much of, right? But I think our team comp works relatively well. We start a fight with Xin Zhao diving in, ideally following up a bind, but the Morg bind's pretty slow. So Zin's going to dive in, start a fight, force the issue, especially if we have kind of if we're able to punch first and be together as we do it, we jump in. Xin Zhao starts a fight on one of their squishies who's caught out. So the rest of their team has to come help them. So I wanted to fight. I've now made them fight. They're fighting us. They start to group up. Morg tries to catch someone with a bind. When they do, Aurelia jumps on them. Or Echo, depending on what position they're in and maybe who's coming from the flank, right? So if we're fighting top, then maybe Aurelia is the next follow-up because she's the one rotating and coming from a flank. Or rather, other way around. If we're fighting top, Echo's the one who'd be roaming, right? Vice versa. So Xin Zhao is the tip of the spear, then Aurelia or Echo follows up. The next person of those three, right? Because theoretically, in certain scenarios, Aurelia or Echo could be the one to start. So of these three, right, they're all melees. They all want to get in there. It's maybe not great against long range, hops, AoE, damage, fear, nonsense. Can block your auto attacks, right? Like this is a pretty good draft. I made some assumptions. The other team responded to them well. My team can work, but it definitely needs to get going. If it doesn't, I have a kind of late game insurance, but everything else kind of wants to fight early. And if I do that and fail, then I'm not going to get to scale. So this draft's a little awkward because it's trying a little too hard to do too many things, I think. But it could work, especially if the Xin Zhao gets going early, gets off some good ganks. So the point I was going to finish earlier was, of these three champions, Xin Zhao, Echo, Aurelia, kind of one goes in, to start it off. The other follows up on a flank. The third sits on the midline. So they stand somewhere behind our front line, not quite all the way on the back line where like Morg is going to play even or behind Jinx. Close enough to quickly put a black shield on her if it's necessary, but also close enough to the front line to support Xin Zhao, right? So Xin Zhao goes in, knocks somebody up, the rest of their team collapses. He ults, hopefully at a good time, to kind of invalidate some of the ranged damage that comes in. That creates a window where those cooldowns are down for my next melee to go in. And then the third person sits and waits to fight Jax when Jax commits to kill the Jinx. All Jinx has to do is survive, right? So we start the fight. We try and get a pick. If we don't, we start to back up, eat their engage, kind of soft counter it, back up. Even if they get Jinx to 10% health, as long as one or two of these three are able to buy enough time to peel the Jax or peel the Jinx away from the Jax, she'll eventually get enough auto attacks off to kill one or two, start resetting, and maybe win the fight. So as soon as draft ends, these are the kinds of questions we have to start answering. Like, what does my team want to do? How does it win? What does their team want to do? How does it win? How do those two things overlap? So, Jeff, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this draft? What were you trying to do? Was I accurate on some of my guesses about your thought process? Like Morg, okay, let's take Kate so they don't get Kate Morg. Like, what do you think? If you're there.
My microphone was not plugged in, so that's why. Okay,
Oh, no worries.
yes, I am here. So honestly, a big part was we were just trying to counter like the different lane matchups. So once you took Morg, we didn't want you to have the Morg Caitlyn combo going together. And then as far as fights, unfortunately, you kind of do these right. We definitely wanted to flank with the Jax, try to blow up Jinx, and then just poke in a lot of range damage on your front line while kiting them.
Yep. That's a great point there. So we don't have any hard tanks, right? Like Xin Zhao, as the game goes on, like he's really strong. He's going to pick some more damage bursty focused items early, and then if the game goes late, then he's going to start to pick up some bruiser items that give him survivability. He doesn't need more damage. He just needs the ability to like have his cooldowns a second time in a team fight, right? So he just needs some survivability. But outside of that, I don't have a true tank. You have good poke with Caitlyn, Seraphine, Vex. What do I mean by poke? I mean damage that can be thrown from a safe distance and that can land pretty reliably. So if we're both playing ARAM on Summoner's Rift, kind of just posturing, waiting for one team to make a mistake in the mid lane, and we hang out there doing that for like 30 seconds, that's enough time for each of these champions to land 2, 3, 4 of their abilities. And if my Xin Zhao, my Echo, my Aurelia eat too much of that, then we can't ever engage. So not only does our team comp want to look for picks, want to like quickly jump on someone, dive on them, blow them up before the other team can react or regroup. Soft reset is what I call it, right? I'll talk about that more in a second. So if we take too much damage before we can do that, we're not going to be able to. If the Xin Zhao's at half health when he finally goes to jump in, then we've lost already. So not only do we want to jump in, but we want to do it quickly. We don't want to hang around. We want to be decisive. So if Xin Zhao's showing up in a lane, he's going in. And if he misses the window to go in, he's not going to go in, right? That's often a very valuable skill, is like the wisdom and foresight to go, not worth it anymore, right? And ignoring the sunk cost fallacy of, well, I'm already here and I've already rotated up here and I've already shown, so I might as well try and make it happen. It's like, if I'm not coming out of fog and immediately jumping on someone and someone's not immediately there to follow me up, then it's probably not worth it, right? Something I kind of did, and that can definitely be a danger in drafts, is going, oh, they picked this, so I'm going to pick that. And only looking to kind of counter matchups. It's really easy to get tunnel vision. I've done this many a time where I go, oh, they picked Morg, we'll take Caitlyn, right? And then, oh, they took this, we'll take the counter pick to that. And then we have like a bunch of champions that don't really work well together. And unless we just win every lane right away, then what do we do, right? And maybe we picked a champion because we thought that it countered another champion, but what we didn't realize is that it doesn't really counter it, it just lanes well into it, right? It's not that you beat this champion early, because like no one beats that champion early. But what you do is you don't die to it 5 times in 10 minutes. The champion you picked counters it by actually just playing safely and shutting down what the other champion is trying to do. And then because you scale better, you've just won by default by barely losing, right? So understanding why you're picking things in the sort of matchup lens, but then also understanding why you're picking things for their synergies. And if you're picking for there to be synergy. So Jeff said he kind of drafted sort of in response to what we were doing. I don't know if he was thinking too much about the overall team composition, but I'd say it's pretty good. I'd say it works pretty well together. You got plenty of damage. You have multiple damage sources. You got 3 ranged and a Kindred and a Jax. That's pretty good. Like, I don't know what I would change, right? Because I took Morg, right? You don't really want to tank engage support, so you don't want this to be like Nautilus Leona, probably. You could have maybe went, like, I don't know. You got counter picks, so what are Aurelia counters? Let's look. Which, once again, this is not everything. This is just solo queue. So Jax, that's a pretty good win rate. Garen, Tryndamere, Volibear, Warwick. Any of these could have worked. A lot of it also depends on what your players can actually play, what they know how to play, right? So if I were drafting for my team instead of taking Jax, I might have taken Jax there because my top laner plays it pretty well. I might have also taken Shen though, right? So how is this team comp different if they have a Shen? They have a much stronger front line. They have like an area around Shen that you can trigger to block auto attack, so that kind of blocks a lot of our damage. Gives you a bit more of a tank. It also gives you the ultimate to kind of make cross-map plays. So in case the Morg and Xin Zhao are able to find a good gank onto the Caitlyn or the Seraphine, the Shen can respond, or he can ult to the jungler, right? So you might look to invade with this pressure early. And then, of course, there's 100 other champions that were neither picked nor banned. So you can already see how there are so many variables that go into play. What do my characters, or what do my players play? What do their players play? Where do they have depth, right? Any questions about this? Because there's so much we could talk about here. And maybe some of that wasn't very helpful or went over your head or you'd like some clarification on it. So any thoughts about draft and sort of how... Because really, this is its own game in and of itself. It's like the game within the game that you, as the coach, play against the other coach, or that your team plays against the other team. And so much of how the rest of the game plays out is based off of this, how this goes, right? Another thing to keep in mind is that, like, you'll watch pro play or high-level players play or hear them talk about the game, and they might say something like, you know, Aurelia's bad now. She got nerfed. This is bad here. You should have picked this. That's clearly the better pick, clearly. And they'll say it with such certainty. Generally, that's because oftentimes they're somewhat right, but only in the context of high-level play. My top laner is just as good as your top laner, or at the very least, they're both professional players. So while mine might be a world champion and yours is a rookie, because they're both pros, they both understand the same dynamics about how the champions match up against each other. So all other things being equal, assuming that both players know how to play either side of the Aurelia into any other champion matchup, right? In this case, Aurelia into Jax, right? So someone might say, like, oh, Jax is going to win. Well, not if your Jax is bronze and my Aurelia is diamond, right? Well, why is that? It's because the bronze Jax player isn't taking advantage of the opportunities that they get, or the Diamond Aurelia player knows how the Jacks would want to punish them and therefore doesn't present those circumstances to them. They play really safe and only pounce on mistakes that they see the enemy make. So at a very high level, all other things being equal between two professional players, that's when a statement like, oh, this champion is clearly better can be true. Because it's like, we're assuming that both players can play all of the champions to a minimum degree of high level proficiency. So then I might as well take the champion that does this, but better, right? There might be a champion that's like, fills the same role that Aurelia fills in this team comp, but they just got a buff and based off of the other team, like it's just better, right? Don't let that influence your decision making when you're drafting for your bronze, silver, gold high school team, right? Like until this player learns some more champions, it is better in a competitive match for them to play Malphite than any other champion. Counterpicked or not, right? Because it's like, I don't know how to play anything else. It's like, oh, I guess you could just go, set top that I've played 8 times to a 50% win rate compared to my 800 games of Malphite, right? Like, doesn't matter what the meta says or what was buffed or not buffed. Most of those buffs are pretty small anyway, right? You'll see a champion that gets like 20 more damage and a half second off a cooldown, and they're like, oh, it's buffed, it's stronger now. It's like, yeah, because all other things being equal, this is the difference maker between two high level players and what decides who wins the fight. But at your level, even at my level, like my collegiate team is like high diamond average. We play other teams. I will take the subpar, according to the meta champion that my player is very good at over the quote unquote correct pick that they've only played 10, 20 times. Because so much of your strength in this game comes from not just knowing what the other champions are doing, but how your champion can best avoid that or capitalize on the mistakes of other champions. It's much easier to learn the game and matchups when you limit the number of variables. So if you play the same champion every game, then it becomes much easier to control for those variables and learn about other champions. But if you're changing the dynamic every game and you're always playing a different champion, it just takes more and more time to get to a level of comfort. So I'll pick the champion that my players played 300 times because they've probably played into every other champion that would be picked in that lane 3, 5, 10 times. So you play the averages. And that's what happens at the pro level. They play the things that will get them the highest chance of winning. Sometimes to a fault. Sometimes I think there are once again, quote unquote, suboptimal champions that could be picked purely because of their value as being unexpected. Right? It's easy to get into sort of draft patterns. This dynamic happened all the time to us this fall, where it was like a team would take Kate. So, okay, we feel like we need to take Morg, or maybe we'll just ban it preemptively so that they can't get Kate Morg. And so like the whole draft then revolves around who picks Morg and or Kate win and how you respond. And especially in a best of 3, a best of 5 match against the team, sometimes it's better to just go, I deny the premise entirely, and I'm going to ban Kate and Morg to force both of us to do something different. And I'm gonna pick Samira. I don't know. You know what I mean? I'm just going to completely switch it up, especially if a player has been playing a champion well and to victory in 1, 2, 3 games in a series, right? Like, just take it away. Don't let them keep doing it. Even if it means they might get some other champion that they're also good at. It's like, well, we're already losing every game to Caitlyn, so let's just pick it ourselves or take it away. That can be a dynamic as well. So that's the other thing to keep in mind is like there's a kind of an art to drafting for a best of 1 compared to a best of 3. Sometimes in a best of 1, it's just like, all right, we're going to pick full on early game and go to punch him in the face. Or over the course of a tournament or season, it might be advantageous to, especially when you're playing teams that you are generally better than and could beat consistently, to play your second or third best comp and to save your best look that you've been working on in scrims until a closer matchup, right? So that's the other factor to keep in mind in a best of series or over the course of a longer season or tournament is what are we showing? Are we giving away too many tells or sharing too many of our secrets? If they just ban this thing that we based all of our drafts off of, then what do we do? Or our team comp is really good and we've beaten every team with it, but what do we do when we play this team that plays Zigspot and that kind of counters our main carry that we've been playing? Then what do we do, right? So that's where champion depth and versatility and the ability to play around multiple lanes comes in handy. But that can be tough when, like, I don't know, this is your team, right? We're like, we're not carrying through top, right? Like our top is not going to go 10-0 on Fiora ever, right? They're going to play Malphite. And really what they're going to do is they're going to play their second best champion every game because they're never going to get to play Malphite, right? So anytime I have a player like this, right, like, okay, here's an example. I'll show you one of my players. I don't know what he's been playing recently. Okay. I want him to be able to play Rek'Sai in games. So I need him at the start of the season to play anything but this so that he doesn't have an OP.GG that's like, oh, he plays Rek'Sai Udyr, right? Now, his champion pool actually is much deeper. But like when we plan most of our drafts, we're assuming that he's not going to play his best champions because they're very often banned. And so we then start constructing drafts around that where it's like, haha, little did you know, we're actually only looking to play Jarvan and Xin Zhao. So please waste 2 bans on these things. But game 3, right, where we won game 1, you won game 2, and both games, our Xin Zhao was kind of a problem for you regardless of the outcome. Then they decide to ban it and then they leave Rek'Sai up. Then we can hit him with the Rek'Sai, right? So like having a little bit of depth in your champion pool goes a long way so that you actually get to play those things. So, you know, if I were working with this team and trying to get them ready to compete in a season, I would be like, top laner, play 1 tank and 1 carry that is not Malphite, and that's all you're going to play for the next 30 games, right? It's like pick up like Volibear and Kennen or something, I don't know, and just play those 2 champions so that you have something else to show us. And then when you pop off in the first 2 games with Kennen, they're going to be like, we can't let him have Kennen again. But well, what don't we ban now? We replace the Malphite ban with a Kennen. Now we get Malphite. They replace, you know, the Sivir ban with a Kennen. Now we get the Sivir. So being able to play many champions across many lanes well will give you a lot of versatility and flexibility and put you in a situation where you're not just totally screwed because they banned your 1 champion or they play the champion that kind of counters your whole play style, right? So you need, you know, a primary look and then a secondary follow-up look, both in a macro sense of like everyone should be able to pick a scaling composition and like try to play that successfully. Even if you're a like very aggressive early game team, you need to be able to kind of shift it up in the middle of a draft or in the middle of a series to kind of give yourself some advantages. So we've covered a lot here. What kind of questions do we have about draft, about coaching League of Legends, about learning the game, about teaching the game? Anything at all that I haven't covered? Or any lingering questions that you have? This is a fun activity to do with your team. I like to draft for the other team that we're going to play in a scrim that night or in a match that weekend and have my team, like have our captain draft for our team and then make them go through this process without me and their comms. And oftentimes it will yield interesting results where it's like, ooh, I never would have thought to draft that. Or it'll show errors in their thinking where it's like, you know, what made you think you could pick this into that? Like clearly this would have been the better pick. Or if you wanted that, you should have taken it later, right? You should have taken something safer in the first 3 that is more versatile and could be played in any comp and then waited to see what they do before you committed to that, right? Quickly, while we're on this point, there's certain champions, like the one that comes to mind is Master Yi, right? Like you could play nothing but this champion in solo queue, and you could get to like high diamond just playing Master Yi. But why don't we see it in pro play then? Well, because it's kind of one-dimensional, and this champion sort of thrives on the chaotic dynamic of solo queue games where teams are not positioned close to each other so that they can peel and overlap each other and cover each other's weaknesses. So that's the other thing to keep in mind is like helping remove the blinders from your players, or helping them better contextualize what their champions do in a team environment. Basically making sure they don't go, oh, I just got 20 kills in a game as Shaco, therefore we should play it in our match today. And it's like, maybe, but we need to think deeply about why that works in solo queue and how that might be different in a competitive match. But at the end of the day, if you have like a gold 1, Shaco 1 trick and you're playing a bronze team, you can just pick Shaco and win, right? So the other, caveat, the other assumption underlying all of this is that like you're playing a team of equal skill, right? If you're much better than the other team, it doesn't really matter what you pick, and you shouldn't troll. But those are the good times to like try to play a completely different style. Where it's like, yeah, we're probably going to win anyway, so there's no point in showing our best look. Let's take this as high level practice, and still approach it with discipline. And not look to just that can be hard too. If the only teams you have to scrim are teams that you're much better than, is like getting your players to act as if their opponents were better than them. So respecting the ways in which they could be punished, even though they're not getting punished. That can be really hard, right? It's really easy to get an overinflated sense of a team's skill when they only play teams that they're better than because they don't realize the mistakes that they're making. And we talked about that earlier in kind of the individual practice level. That's why film review is so important, self-reflection is so important. The same thing is true for the whole team, right? You got to reflect back on how the game went and actually ask yourself, like, what worked, what didn't. All right, we're getting into vague platitudes now. I'm running out of steam. What other questions, thoughts, concerns do we have? I'm glad that this has been helpful. I appreciate your thoughts, your feedback. Any other questions? Once again, I want to remind everybody of, since we've put a bunch in the chat now, of Amy's post here, VODs from this session last year. If you have a new coach or a new player, or you're helping onboard a new school, or you just want to review, definitely go back and watch those. I went through a much more sort of organized framework, beginning, intermediate, advanced. As a review, today we kind of covered mostly your questions. We did this little mock draft. We talked kind of big picture. Rather than rehashing what I did last year, we kind of answered your questions and went a little deeper on some of those topics. There's a lot more advanced strategy I could talk about. There's a lot. There's way more to drafting than I covered here, but good place to start. The other thing I didn't talk about with draft is the importance of flex picks, so things that can be played in 2 or 3 lanes. Those are generally good to pick early. And then also don't be afraid, especially at your level, where you have a team like this where people don't have clear roles, where it's like, okay, this guy's going to be mid unless we can't play Xerath, at which point we might send this guy mid because he's good at Malzahar, and this guy will play Ashe or Caitlyn or whatever. You know what I mean? So that's something we do quite a bit as well. Is we'll pick a flex pick without knowing, we'll first pick something without knowing which lane it's going to or even who's going to play it yet. And that can really keep the other team guessing and give you some potential. And at least half the time when we take those flex picks, invariably they end up going to the most likely lane assignments. But because we had the option of flexing them, it meant that there were more possibilities that the other team had to consider. Some other quick thoughts on draft that you'll find incredibly, I think, useful. Dynamics that come up a lot are sort of Malphite and Silas. So if a team bans Silas against you in second rotation and they haven't picked their top laner yet and Malphite's still up, they might be looking for Malphite because Silas is a really big counter. And that dynamic you can see in a lot of champions where it's like, particularly with Silas, because that champion takes your ult. So there's a lot of games where it's like, ooh, our team would be really good if we had Malphite here, and then their team goes, so would our team. We will also take Malphite by picking Silas, but actually we're just a better Malphite, but we also get his ult, right? So that's a dynamic that you see a lot. Morg is at the center of a lot of drafts because she's kind of the primary means of countering Nautilus, Thresh, Pike, that kind of thing. What are some other really common dynamics in the draft? Sort of ganking versus scaling junglers. So if I want to play something like a Shyvana jungle, then I might need to ban, like, I don't know, what counters Shyvana the hardest? What makes it very difficult for her to farm? What can invade her? Oh yeah, like a Jarvan, right? Talon. Both of those would be pretty good bans. Heckrim. So if I know that we're going to want to play a Shyvana, then I might preemptively ban some of those things. So that's a common dynamic. Is sort of our jungler versus theirs. What happens if we get invaded, right? So then if we are on the back foot of the jungle matchup, or we're the one who's more likely to be invaded, then that will either impact where we start or what other champions we pick in top and mid. You might want champions that can rotate over faster, that can help them if they get invaded, right? So that's a pretty common dynamic. The other big one is Thunderdome. So for those that don't know, Galio, his ultimate allows him to jump up in the air and then slam down somewhere else on the map in a pretty wide range, not quite fully global, but pretty wide, and then knock people up where he lands. That becomes really easy when your team also has a Jarvan who can dash from very far away and then trap people in a big circle. So if you've been correctly timing summoners throughout the game, then your Jarvan can go, I'm going to jump on their Jinx. And then Galio can go, I'm also going to jump on their Jinx when you do that. And that becomes a very reliable team composition, a very reliable fighting strategy. The comp is called Thunderdome, so that can be pretty common in drafts, is like, ooh, they have Jarvan or Camille or other champions that kind of do a similar thing, enable the alley-oop with Galio, and they haven't taken Galio, then you might want to ban it or take it in second rotation before they have the chance to round out their comp with it. You can also bait teams into doing that, where it's like, I want to take Jarvan, but I'm not really intending to play Galio, so there's more value in me picking Jarvan in the first three and or Camille, and then they feel the extra pressure to ban the Galio. And that's maybe a free ban for us because we were never going to play it. So you wasted a ban on something that we weren't going to play. So that's where scouting can come in. That's really hard a lot of the time, especially in scrims and whatnot. When we scrim a team, we kind of just look over their op.gg 20 minutes before the match and then go in with kind of our gut assumptions game one and then change from there. Another thing we might do, if we know that we want to practice a specific champion or a specific dynamic, specific style, then rather than banning the things they're best at, right, because the point of the scrimmage isn't to win, it's to improve, we might ban the things that counter it or that would make it hard or annoying or whatever. So we might not draft the same way we would in a competitive match where our only goal is to win. In a scrimmage where we just want to get better, we might draft entirely to engineer them playing a specific style of comp so we can practice the counter matchup to that or something. There's much more to draft. So those 3 links to my videos from last year are available here. I replied to that message. We have this VOD now that you can refer back to. I said I was going to share some documents, which I'll do later today. I just want to clean them up for you. and some other resources. Any other questions, thoughts, concerns?
I had a question for you. So we just just had Smash this morning, and one of the things I found that I hadn't thought about at all was Chu said that they recruit from the amateur scene, and so I was just wondering, like with Play Versus dominating high school League of Legends, where do you look for your talent for League of Legends?
That's a great question. Mostly I've been looking locally. So 2 of our starters this year are freshmen from Missouri. I'm looking at some current Missouri high school players right now. So our league team is sort of a half step below Chu's team, SLU. We played them at a LAN this fall. That was the game I was actually referencing when I said, hey, we'd been practicing the early game and we played it pretty well and we could hold our own against much better teams. So SLU is definitely better than us, and we played them very close for 10, 15 minutes, but then we started to lose, right? So those are the things we talked about in film review. It was a positive experience for us, but they're definitely like a half tier above us. We'll occasionally like get some players that mostly like transfers, or people that like went to college for a bit and then left and tried to pursue amateur for a while. But for the most part, I'm looking at freshmen and I'm looking at Missouri schools and then slowly kind of expanding that footprint out to Kansas, Illinois, Arkansas, etc. But that's mostly where I look. I'm looking for any more students that have been doing this in high school that already have some of that knowledge, some of that team framework, and who are excited to come in and learn and grow in our system, as opposed to kind of top amateur players that tend to hop around a lot, which there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. It just happens quite a bit. And there's a lot of turnover, and I value consistency year over year as opposed to let's bring in this guy who really wants to go pro, and they're gonna be here for a semester or two and whatnot, and maybe put themselves in even more of a hole if they ever want to go back to school because they're trying to balance too many things, right? So, but that's a great question. Thank you. If any of your players are interested in playing in college, feel free to connect them with me. We have an A team that's sort of high diamond, low masters average. We have a B team that's gold average, and as we continue to grow, I think we'll squeeze more rosters sort of in those gaps. So I wasn't lying when I said earlier the main things that I look for are the ability to give and receive constructive criticism, a positive attitude, self-reflection, mindfulness, those sorts of things. So skill is important, and it'll determine kind of where you start out. But at the end of the day, it's about someone's attitude, and we have rosters for wherever they're at skill-wise. So, and we don't recruit quite so exclusively. I'll chat with anybody. Any other questions about League of Legends, playing it, learning it, coaching it, teaching it? I want to thank everybody again for taking some time out of their Saturdays to increase their knowledge, network with your fellow coaches, and build a better space for your students. I think it's really awesome. Of course, Jeff, I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me. You guys have been a great audience thus far. Coach Wofford says, I can vouch for Coach Jones. Thank you. That's very sweet of you. I really do appreciate that. Last call. Going once, going twice. Any final questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or type in the chat. I want to make sure that we've covered everything that you wanted to get out of today. Also, open invitation. Feel free to DM me or follow up if you ever have any questions, if there's anything I can do to help. If you'd like me to hop in a Discord call or even come visit campus and chat with your students, I would gladly do that. So. Yeah, no problem. I'm glad it was helpful. Any other questions? Chris says, thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you to the Woffords. Thank you, Curtis. I really do appreciate it. How to absorb it all. Yeah. I did cover a lot. I need more visual aids, I think. I went through a lot of that in the old videos, if you want to go back, especially in sort of the first one or two. Later today, I'm going to post that checklist, as well as some other links to some of the tools we used, op.gg, ProDraft. RiftKit is a great tool that allows you to like move things around on an actual map. The other thing that I would recommend is for film review is Insights. It's called insights.gg. It allows for like asynchronous VOD review, which is really nice, especially in these COVID times. If you're practicing from home, it's really helpful where you can kind of upload a video or a replay and then make comments on timestamps and draw on the map and use icons and some other things. It's really helpful for VOD review. So, all right. Well, I think we'll leave it at that. If there's any other questions, feel free to DM me. Did I fill the time? I want to make sure that I wasn't supposed to be here for like another hour or something. I want to be respectful of everyone else's time. And I think we've kind of hit the end of it, unless there's any other questions. Going once, going twice. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I really do appreciate you joining us today. This is awesome. The work that you do is awesome. If there's anything else I can ever do to help you or your programs or MOSEF as a whole, we are here supporting you. You guys are amazing. So thank you for your time. And we're out. Was that on Twitch? You said?